Some victories are meant to be celebrated. Others are meant to be protected. When you get accepted into college, you don't keep it to yourself. When that long-awaited pregnancy is finally confirmed, you tell the people you love. When you buy a new car, you take photos, you call someone you celebrate. Because that's what we do. We share good news with family, with close friends, with the people who are supposed to be happy for us. So here's the question most people never stop to ask. If you would never hide those victories, why does spiritual awakening, the moment your entire inner life shifts, so often becomes something you feel compelled to announce? Carl Jung understood something uncomfortable about this. Not every transformation is safe to share the way a victory is. Because awakening doesn't just bring good news. It quietly changes your position inside the psychological world around you. And when that happens, people don't simply listen. They react. Sometimes with admiration, more often with discomfort, with jokes that sound harmless, with curiosity that's actually surveillance, with support that slowly turns into distance. Jung warned that the greatest danger of awakening isn't confusion. It's premature revelation. The mistake isn't becoming aware. The mistake is telling the wrong people what that awareness is doing inside you. In this video, I'll walk you through 7 things the spiritually awake should never reveal. Not because they're wrong, but because they're powerful. And by the end, you'll understand why Jung believed silence is not weakness. It's psychological self-protection. Because the very first thing people reveal, almost automatically, is the moment everything starts to shift. Number 1, never reveal that you're spiritually awake. One of the first impulses during awakening is the need to name it, to say it out loud, to give language to what you're experiencing. I'm waking up. I'm more aware now. I don't see the world the same way anymore. It sounds harmless, even honest. But Jung understood something crucial. The moment you label your awakening publicly, you change how people relate to you. Not because they understand what you're saying, but because they feel compared. Awakening disrupts hierarchy. It quietly shifts roles. And when you announce it, you're no longer just sharing an experience. You're signaling separation from the collective unconscious. Some people respond with curiosity, but many respond with subtle defensiveness. They joke. They downplay it. They frame it as a phase. Or they suddenly see you as too intense, too distant, or too different. Not because you became arrogant, but because you stopped living on autopilot. Jung warned that the ego resists anything that threatens its familiar identity. And awareness does exactly that. So silence at this stage is not denial. It's containment. Because awakening needs space, not commentary. But the real tension doesn't begin when you say you're awakening. It begins when you start talking about what you've begun to see. Number 2, never reveal what you've started to see. One of the quiet consequences of spiritual awakening is that your perception changes before your life does. You begin to notice patterns others ignore. Emotional games beneath polite conversations. Contradictions between what people say and what they actually do. Unspoken tensions in rooms that used to feel neutral. And naturally, you want to talk about it. You want to share what you're seeing, not to feel superior, but to feel understood. But Jung warned that insight, when revealed too early or to the wrong audience, doesn't awaken others. It threatens them, because insight isn't neutral. When you articulate what you've begun to see, people don't receive it as information. They receive it as implication. They hear judgment where there is none. They feel exposed even when you speak gently. They sense comparison even when you intend connection. So instead of curiosity, resistance appears. Your observations are dismissed as overthinking. Your clarity is reframed as negativity. Your intuition is labeled projection. Not because you're wrong, but because awareness destabilizes comfort. Jung understood that the psyche protects itself from anything. That forces self-confrontation. When people aren't ready to look inward, they don't integrate insight. They neutralize it. They minimize it. They intellectualize it away. Or they turn it into something smaller, safer, and easier to ignore. And slowly, you begin to notice something painful. The more clearly you see, the less welcome your words become. That's when silence stops feeling like repression and starts feeling like discernment, because not every truth wants to be spoken. Some truths want to mature quietly. Jung believed that wisdom unfolds symbolically, not argumentatively. It needs time, containment, inner digestion. When insight is rushed into language, it often loses its transformative power. So the spiritually awake learn a difficult lesson. Clarity does not require validation. You don't need others to agree with what you see for it to be real. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can do, for yourself and for others, is to hold your perception privately until it has fully integrated into who you are. And when what you see begins to change you, when insight turns into healing, the psychological tension becomes impossible to ignore. Number 3, never reveal your healing process. One of the strangest parts of healing is realizing that not everyone is comfortable watching you get better. At first, the changes seem small. You stop reacting the way you used to. You no longer explain yourself in every disagreement. You take a breath instead of escalating. You leave conversations earlier. You say no without a long apology attached. And people notice. A friend says, "You've changed." A family member jokes, "You're too sensitive now." A coworker asks, "Why are you so quiet lately?" None of it sounds aggressive, but something underneath feels off. Because healing quietly disrupts the roles people assign to you. If you were the one who always listened, your boundaries feel like rejection. If you were the one who absorbed tension, your calm feels like withdrawal. If you were the one who struggled openly, your stability feels threatening. Jung observed that many relationships are unconsciously built around shared wounds. Pain creates familiarity. Dysfunction creates bonding. So when one person begins to heal, the relationship loses its old equilibrium. You're no longer predictable. You're no longer reactive. You're no longer validating other people's coping mechanisms. And instead of celebration, subtle resistance appears. People interrupt you more. They minimize your progress. They bring up your past at the exact moment you're trying to move forward. Not because they want to hurt you, but because your healing forces them to face what they've avoided. Jung believed that the psyche resists change that threatens identity. And when your healing exposes someone else's stagnation, defense becomes inevitable. This is why oversharing your healing process can be dangerous. When you explain every insight, every breakthrough, every emotional shift, you invite commentary, interpretation, and unconscious sabotage. Healing doesn't need an audience. It needs consistency. Some transformations strengthen through privacy, through repetition, through quiet embodiment. The spiritually awake learn this the hard way. Not everyone who loves you is ready to see you whole. And that doesn't make them bad. It just makes discernment necessary. And the moment healing turns into direction, when you start sensing where you're going next, another kind of resistance begins to form. Number 4, never reveal your next move. Verso revisata com metafora de jogos. In every great game, chess, poker, even simple strategy games, there's one rule everyone understands instinctively. The moment you reveal your next move, you lose your advantage. The power isn't in the peace. It's in the uncertainty. A hidden strategy creates tension. A visible one invites interference. The same principle applies to life, especially during awakening. There comes a moment when healing turns into direction. You're not just feeling better anymore. You're starting to sense where your life wants to go. Maybe you're considering changing careers, ending a relationship that no longer fits, moving cities, starting something that finally feels aligned. And just like in a game, the impulse is to announce your next move. You tell someone casually. You think out loud. You look for confirmation. But the moment you do, the board changes. People begin reacting not to your alignment, but to their interpretation of your strategy. A friend questions the risk. A family member projects their fear. Someone reminds you of a past failure, theirs or yours. None of it feels aggressive. But suddenly, you're no longer playing your game. You're responding to everyone else's moves. Jung understood this deeply. He believed that intention develops strength in silence. The unconscious responds to inner commitment, not public declaration. When a direction is spoken too early, its energy leaks into explanation, defense, and anticipation. You start rehearsing answers, preparing justifications, imagining how you'll look if it doesn't work. And like a revealed strategy in a game, the mystery is gone, and with it your advantage. This is why so many people feel energized before sharing a plan, and strangely depleted afterward. Not because the plan was wrong, but because it was exposed before it was embodied. The spiritually awake learn to move differently. They keep their strategy quiet. They let their alignment stabilize. They act first and explain later. Because in life, as in games, mystery is not manipulation. It's wisdom. But the most dangerous revelations aren't about strategy or future moves. They happen when vulnerability meets the wrong listener. Number 5. Never reveal your inner struggles to the wrong people. One of the most misleading ideas in modern spirituality is that vulnerability should be unlimited, that the more you share, the more authentic you are. But Jung made a crucial distinction. Not every listener is a witness. Some people listen to understand. Others listen to collect. You've probably felt this without realizing it. You open up about a fear, and later, it's brought up casually in a joke. You admit uncertainty, and someone starts treating you as fragile. You share a struggle, and suddenly advice replaces empathy. Nothing overtly cruel happens, but something shifts. You feel smaller, more exposed, less safe. Jung understood that vulnerability in the wrong environment doesn't heal, it fragments. Because when someone hasn't faced their own shadow, they don't know how to hold yours. They interpret your honesty through their own defenses. They unconsciously judge what they secretly fear. They reduce your complexity into a single weak moment. And later, sometimes much later, that information resurfaces. In arguments, in moments of tension, in subtle power plays. Not because the person planned it, but because unintegrated shadow always looks for leverage. This is why discernment matters more than openness. The spiritually awake don't shut down emotionally. They choose carefully where their inner world is seen. Because trust is not about how long you've known someone. It's about how safe you feel after you speak. If you walk away from a conversation feeling lighter, you chose well. If you walk away replaying your words in your head, something important just revealed itself. Jung believed that psychic safety is essential for growth. And safety doesn't come from exposure. It comes from containment. Not everyone deserves access to your inner struggle. Some people are only equipped to hear the polished version of you. And that's not dishonesty. It's wisdom. And this discernment becomes absolutely essential when your work turns inward, toward the parts of you most people never face. Number 6. Never reveal your shadow work. Shadow work is one of the most misunderstood ideas in modern psychology and spirituality. It sounds poetic, even fashionable. People talk about it as if it were self-care, journaling, affirmations, self-love. But Carl Jung meant something far more unsettling. Shadow work is not about becoming nicer. It's about becoming honest. It's the moment you stop seeing yourself only as the victim, the wounded one, the misunderstood one, and start seeing the parts of you that are uncomfortable to admit. The envy, the resentment, the desire for control, the anger you learn to spiritualize instead of confront, the part of you that enjoys being right more than being connected. This is not something most people want to witness, especially when they haven't faced it in themselves. Jung warned that the shadow contains everything the ego refuses to identify with. And when someone begins to integrate it, they no longer fit clean moral categories. You're not purely light. You're not easily readable. You're not predictable. And that makes people uneasy. When you openly talk about your shadow work, many listeners don't hear maturity. They hear threat, because someone who knows their shadow is no longer controlled by appearances. They don't need to be seen as good. They don't need constant approval. They don't fear their own darkness. And unconsciously, people sense that. This is where reactions shift. Some become uncomfortable and pull away. Some subtly moralize. That sounds dangerous. You're overthinking. Why dig into negativity? Some pretend to be curious while quietly distancing themselves. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because shadow integration exposes denial. Jung believed that people who haven't integrated their shadow are governed by it unconsciously, which means when they encounter someone who has begun that integration, they don't feel inspired. They feel destabilized. This is why shadow work is often done in isolation, not because it's secretive, but because it's incompatible with superficial environments. Think about it. If you say you're working on your anger, some will hear danger. If you admit controlling tendencies, some will label you unsafe. If you talk about resentment, some will freeze you in that identity. Because many people can only relate to fixed versions of others. They don't understand process. They don't understand integration. They only understand labels. Jung warned against this exact danger, revealing unfinished inner work to people who lack psychological literacy. An integrated shadow creates humility. An unintegrated one seeks exposure. So when shadow work is shared prematurely, it often backfires. Instead of understanding, you receive projection. Instead of nuance, you receive simplification. Instead of containment, you receive judgment. This is why the spiritually awake move differently. They don't deny their shadow, but they don't broadcast it either. They do the work quietly. They let behavior change before explanations. They allow insight to reshape identity privately. Because shadow work is not about confession. It's about transformation. And transformation needs safety. Jung believed individuation, the process of becoming whole, is inherently lonely. Not because you lose people, but because fewer people can walk with you. When you stop pretending to be only light. This is also why shadow-integrated individuals often feel misunderstood. They're calmer in chaos, less reactive to judgment, less interested in defending their image. And paradoxically, this can look cold or distant to those who still depend on validation. But what's really happening is that inner authority has replaced external approval. And that is precisely why shadow work should remain mostly private. Because once you integrate it, you no longer need to explain yourself. Your presence speaks for you. And when shadow, healing, perception, and direction begin to align, you reach the most fragile phase of all, the moment you are becoming someone new. Number 7. Never reveal who you're becoming. There comes a moment in awakening That feels both exhilarating and fragile. You're no longer who you were, but you're not yet who you're becoming. Cinema has captured this moment perfectly. In The Matrix, there's a phase after Neo takes the red pill that most people forget. He doesn't immediately become the one. He stumbles. He doubts. His body rejects the truth before it learns to embody it. And notice something important. Neo doesn't walk around explaining what he's becoming. He doesn't announce his destiny. He trains in silence. Because becoming is not a declaration. It's an integration. Carl Jung warned that identity named too early hardens what still needs to remain fluid. When people announce who they're becoming, they unconsciously trap themselves inside that image. They begin performing the role. Instead of discovering it, Neo only becomes the one. When he stops trying to prove it, the same dynamic appears in Hermann Hesse's Damien. The protagonist, Sinclair, enters a painful in-between state, no longer fitting into the moral simplicity of his old world, yet not fully anchored in his emerging self. He doesn't broadcast his transformation. He withdraws. He reflects. He allows confusion. Hesse, deeply influenced by Jung, understood that individuation requires a symbolic descent before coherence returns. This is the phase most people try to escape. They rush to name their identity. They adopt labels. They explain themselves prematurely. But Jung believed this urge comes from the ego, not the self. The ego wants certainty, recognition, belonging. The self wants alignment, and alignment requires time. When you tell the world who you're becoming, you invite feedback before your psyche is stabilized. People respond to the label, not the evolution. They mirror back expectations. They hold you to words spoken during a fragile phase. And slowly, you begin adjusting yourself to remain consistent with something that was never meant to be final. This is why the spiritually awake often appear undefined for a while. They resist explanation. They let misunderstandings exist. They stop correcting people's perceptions, not out of arrogance, but out of respect for the process. Jung believed the self reveals itself symbolically, through behavior, not announcements. This is why deeply individuated people often seem simple on the surface. They don't narrate their growth. They don't justify their boundaries. They don't need to convince anyone. Their presence carries coherence. And like Neo, they are recognized, not because they declared who they were, but because they embodied it. If you're in this phase right now, between who you were and who you're becoming, understand this. Silence is not hesitation. It's incubation. Protect the process. Not every becoming needs a name. Some only need time. And when the self is ready to emerge, it won't need explanation. It will be felt. Some victories are meant to be celebrated. Others are meant to be protected. Spiritual awakening doesn't ask for applause. It asks for discernment. Because not everyone can walk with you. When you stop living unconsciously, silence in this context is not fear. It's maturity. It's knowing when to speak, and when presence is enough. Carl Jung believed that individuation is not a public performance. It's a private alignment. And when that alignment is real, it doesn't need explanation. It's felt. So if you recognized yourself in this journey, in the restraint, in the solitude, in the quiet strength that comes from no longer needing to be understood, trust it. You're not hiding. You're protecting something that's still becoming whole. And here's the part most people never talk about. There's a cost to revealing too much. And there's also a way to recover the power that leaks through overexposure. In the next video, we'll talk about what happens after you reveal what should have stayed protected, and how to reclaim your psychological center when boundaries have already been crossed. If this resonated, you already know what to do. Subscribe to Hidden Mind. Stay with us. This space isn't for everyone, but if you're here, it's because something in you recognized itself. And that recognition is only the beginning.